God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Israel, Bible God, Christian God, Jehovah Elohim, call him what you may. Is he God or Satan? This is part 8 of this series of teachings and analysis of the Bible. In part 7, we dealt with the atrocities of God. All what we are doing is to verify, using the Bible, whether this God presented to us by the Bible is actually God the Creator or not. So in part 7, we looked at the atrocities committed by this God. And we listed few of them. Though there are many atrocities committed by this God, we listed only few. And today in part 8, we are going to look at the sacrifices offered to this God. But before I start with part 8, I want to recap what we learned in part 7. In part 7, we learned about this God delivering the children of Israel from Egypt. And in order for him to deliver them from Egypt, he needed the permission of the king of Egypt. And he hardened the heart of the king so that the king will not grant the permission that he needed, so that he will have the opportunity to destroy innocent people of Egypt. And we saw how he destroyed all the firstborn of the Egyptians. He committed 10 different atrocities against the Egyptians because he himself hardened the heart of Pharaoh for Pharaoh not to give the permission so that he can have the opportunity to destroy innocent people of the land, including other slaves. Though this God claimed that he was fighting to deliver the Israelites from the Egyptian slavery, he himself in Leviticus chapter 25 verse 44 granted the Israelites the permission to buy slaves after delivering them from slavery. And he even went ahead to give an obnoxious law for the Israelites to beat their slaves even to the point of death in Exodus chapter 21 verse 20 and 21. We also learned how this God sent fiery serpents, poisonous snakes to bite and destroy the Israelites, bite and destroy them. Many of them died in the desert as a result of snake bite. But why did this God send poisonous snakes to bite and destroy the people of Israel? He did this because they complained or asked for food. We also saw this God deleting over 24,000 Israelites because they took boyfriends and girlfriends among the Midianites. And for that offense of taking boyfriends and girlfriends among the Midianites and participation in their sacrifice, he destroyed thousands of them. And he also instructed Moses to launch a genocidal attack against the Midianites. And he destroyed all the Midianites. The soldiers that went to the war were kind enough to capture women and children and bring them into the camp of Israel. But this God destroyed all the children and left only the virgins for the Israelites to marry them. We also saw how this God went on rampage, destroying thousands of people because David has offended him. This is craziness. Because of the offense of one man, this God went on rampage, destroying an estimated of 200,000 people because David has offended him. And the wonderful thing is that he did not even attack David. Then we also saw how he launched genocide attack against the people of Jericho for no offense, but to steal their riches and take their gold into his own treasury. God, who created all the earth, who created all the gold, who created all the planet, have to go and attack Jericho and destroy them in order to steal their wealth into his treasury, an armed robber. We also saw how this God launched an attack against the people of Amalek and utterly destroyed them. Everybody, none was left. This is the atrocities that were committed by this God. Not mentioning Sodom, Gomorrah, Noah's flood, and many other atrocities. If you read the Bible, if you read the book of the Judges, if you read the book of the Chronicles and the Kings and the Samuels, you will see this God committing one atrocity upon another, genocide upon genocide, destroying the Jebusite, the Hittite, the Amalekite, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Canaanite, and all the tribes that were living in the land of Canaan. This God committed genocide against all of them and exterminated them completely. This is the most wicked entity that you can ever think of on this earth. And this is the God presented to us as the loving Father of all. Is he the one who created all these people he was destroying and committing genocide against? Is he the one who created these people of Jericho that he went to exterminate them and rob them of their riches? No, no. Today we are going into another area, the sacrifices to this God. So let's go into the Bible and start today's lesson. As we saw in part 7, this God deleted all the firstborn of the Egyptians in order to deliver the Israelites from the Egyptian slavery. And this God is claiming that because he deleted all the firstborn of the Egyptians, men and animal alike, he is demanding the firstborn of all Israel, men and animals, to be his. So in Exodus chapter 13, verse 1 and 2, this God demanded that all Israelites firstborn, if an animal give birth for the first time, if a human give birth for the first time, that child belongs to him. Why? Because he deleted all the firstborn of the Egyptians in order to deliver the Israelites. In other words, the punishment that he gave to the Egyptians, the atrocity that he committed against the Egyptians by deleting all their firstborns in order to deliver the Israelites from the slavery of Egypt, is going to continue with the Israelites. He is going to demand all their firstborn also forever and ever. This was the demand. So all the firstborn are to be sacrificed on the altar of this God. And all these sacrifices will involve slaughtering the animal and burning the meat and sprinkling the blood around the altar of this God. So the human beings were given permission to be redeemed. So it's just like sentencing somebody to death with an option of a fine. So if you give birth for the first time, your son is to be sacrificed to this Jehovah Elohim. But you have an option to pay the fine and redeem your son. And this is how this word redemption came in. So if you hear Christians talking about redemption, this is the source of that word, which means your firstborn is to be sacrificed to this God, but you have an option to redeem your son with another animal. And if you fail to redeem him, what happens to your son? I can't answer that question. Ask yourself and answer that question for yourself. What What it means here is that your son is sentenced to death with an option for a fine. What happens if you fail to pay the fine? Answer for yourself. The entire book of Leviticus shows how animal sacrifices were made to this God, Christian God. If you look at Leviticus chapter 1, it talks about burnt offering. Chapter 2 talks about meat offering. Meat here means food, flour, grain that is milled into flour, plus oil and incense, pastries and others. These were called food offering. But in the King James Bible, meat stands for food. So they call it meat offering. We have peace offering in Leviticus chapter 3. Then we have sin offering in Leviticus chapter 4. Then we have trespass offering in Leviticus chapter 6. So the entire book of Leviticus, if you read from chapter 1 up to the last chapter, you will see details of how sacrifices were made to this God. But I want to summarize how these sacrifices were made, whether burnt offering or sin offering, trespass offering, or whatever. It all either involve animals, that is goat, sheep, and bulls. And for the poor who cannot afford sheep and goat and bulls, they were demanded to bring pigeons and doves. Those pigeons, goats, sheep, and bulls were the main animals that were used for sacrifices unto this God. And all these sacrifices involve burnt offering. It was burnt on the altar. What is the altar? The altar is a stone structure. They build a stone structure where you can set fire, print a huge amount of fire on that stone structure, altar. So when you bring the animals, so let's take a sheep, you bring a sheep for offering. What you do is you lay your hands on the animal. That is how the ritual was done. You lay your hands on the animal. After laying your hands on the animal, then the animal is slaughtered and the blood is collected. Then the priest will sprinkle the blood around the altar of the Christian God. After sprinkling the blood and pouring the blood around the altar, the priest will set fire, huge amount of fire, enough to burn the whole meat. So you can see that the altar was a big structure, a big fireplace. So the meat is prepared, the animal is skinned, and the meat clean, the intestines and others will be clean, and all the fat and the meat and everything will be placed on the fire and burnt. So it's like you are roasting the meat for this God. This is how offering was done for this God. And if it involves meat offering, which is food, then in this case, the grains, the cereals will be milled into powder. So you bring a flour of millet or maize or whatever food that you have, you bring the flour. Then you add oil to it, and then you add an incense to it. So the priest, when it is food, then all will not be burnt. The priest will take a sample, a handful of it, and throw it into the fire, and pour the oil also, and they burn the incense as well. So this is how the food offering was done. Or you bring bread or pastries, cakes and others, the same thing will be done. They will burn sample of the thing in the fire and take the rest and go and eat it. This is how offering was done for both animals and food. But the animals are talking about the sheep, the bulls, the same method. But for the birds, they will cut off the head of the bird and hold the legs. So if you cut off the head, you hold the legs of the bird, and then the blood of the bird will now be dropping on the altar. So you sprinkle the blood of the pigeon by holding the legs and cutting off the head and sprinkling the blood around the altar. If it's the bird, after that, the bird is prepared and the meat is also put into the fire, and the fire is burnt, the meat is burnt. So this is how offering was done to this God of Israel. So now the question is, how different is this God from the other gods of Africa? For example, I'm African, so I'm going to talk about Africa. We have gods in Africa here where we offer sheep and other animal blood to them. And this Christian God was also doing exactly the same thing, only that he was more demanding than even the gods that we have in Africa. Because I don't see any African God demanding firstborn of all animals of his worshippers. They only did it as and when they feel they want to do it, or as and when they are demanding something from this God. Then the African gods, when you demand something from them, then you go with your offering and your sacrifices to them. At times, they don't even take the sacrifices. They will do the thing for you before you go and thank them with your sacrifices. But this God of Israel demanded every firstborn, including human beings, for all sacrifices. So this God was drinking blood every morning, afternoon, and evening. The altar of this God was flowing with blood of animals 24/7. What is the difference between this deity of Israel, this Christian God, and the gods of Africa, which this God is condemning? This God is sucking blood more than the other gods that he is condemning. So there's no difference between this God and the other gods. The only difference is that he is demanding more blood, and he's more bloodier than any deity that I have ever heard of on this earth. And if you know of any deity demanding more blood than this Christian God, do make me know in the comment section. As we saw in part 1 of these teachings, Abraham was the first to serve this God. After serving this God for several decades, this God one day demanded Abraham to offer his first and only son, though he was having two sons, but one of them have left, so he was left with only one son, Isaac. And this God demanded that this, his only son left with him, should be offered as a sacrifice unto him. Can you imagine this? This God is demanding that Abraham, his only servant on this earth, should offer his son as a sacrifice unto him. And Abraham obeyed and went to the place of the sacrifice and offered his son, tied him up, and put him on the altar, lifted his knife before this God stopped him. So Isaac was nearly sacrificed on the altar of this God. Some pastors will tell you that he was only testing Abraham. He was only testing him. Let's agree. But the question is, if you are all-knowing, you don't test anybody because you know the result of the test. If you are God, the all-knowing, you know the mind of Abraham. If he is faithful to you, you know. If he is not faithful to you, you know. So why do you test him if you know his mind? And why did Abraham obey? Did he know of this God to be accepting human sacrifices? Did he know? Because at this time, I can estimate that Abraham have served this God for maybe more than 40 years, as at the time he was requesting this insane request from Abraham. So Abraham knew this God for 40 to 50 years before he was making this request. So did Abraham know of this God to be accepting human sacrifice or not? And why did he obey to go and sacrifice his only son on the altar of this God before he finally stopped him? I can't answer that question. Why did he obey? And why did the all-knowing God decide to test somebody, though he knows the mind of everybody? He knows the thought of everybody. So why was he testing Abraham? Let's look at another instance where human sacrifices to this God took place. Judges chapter 11. The Israelites were at war with the people of Ammon, and they chose Jephthah as their leader. The battle was tough, so Jephthah made a pledge to God of Israel. And let's read the pledge that Jephthah made to this God. Judges chapter 11, verse 30 and 31. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord and said, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into my hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth the door of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Here, Jephthah is praying to the Lord that if God helps him and he goes to this battle and returns with victory, then when he is coming back home, whatever will come out of his door to meet him first will be used as a burnt offering to this God. Whatever comes out of his door first to meet him when he returns in victory will be used as a burnt offering. And what happened? He went, and this God, being a war deity, as we all know, helped him, and he emerged victorious from the war against the Amorite. And when he was returning, his only daughter was the one who met him first. So according to his own pledge, he has to now sacrifice his daughter as a burnt offering to this God. Now we have many questions to ask here. Did Jephthah know that this God accepts human sacrifices or not? Did Jephthah know? Because Jephthah was an Israelite and he had served this God for years. So he knows what this God accepts and what it doesn't. And when he was making the pledge, what was in his mind? Because he said when he returns from the war, anything, whatever, meet him first will be used as a sacrifice unto this God. So what was in his mind? Was he expecting the bulls, the sheep, and the goats to meet him? If you go to battle and you are returning with a victory, and the alarm reaches the house that the warrior has gone to battle and he is coming back home with victory, what is expected to meet him first? who will run to meet him first? Is it his goat or his sheep or his cow? So what was he expecting to meet him first? Is a human being obvious? Because no one will come home with victory and have his sheep and goat meeting him first. So he was expecting a human being. You can theorize and argue, but what was in Jephthah's mind? You can't convince me anyway that Jephthah was expecting a big bull from his house to run and meet him to congratulate him for the victory. You can't convince me that Jephthah was expecting the ram in his house to run and meet him and congratulate him for his victory. You can't convince me of that. So it is obvious that he was expecting a human being to meet him first. Not a sheep, not a goat, not a bull, not a pigeon, not a rooster. No. And if he expected a human being, then was this God accepting human sacrifice? Did he know of this God accepting human sacrifices? Yes. If he know this God don't accept human sacrifices, he will not have made this pledge. Because this pledge definitely shows that he was expecting a human being to meet him first, but he wasn't expecting his only daughter. So when his only daughter met him first, he started crying. But what happened? Did he abide by his pledge or not? Let's find out. Now, reading the whole chapter, you find out that the daughter accepted for the father to offer him as a sacrifice unto this God, but requested that the father should allow him to go and mourn with his friends for some time, and after that he will return as a sacrifice unto this God. So he went and mourned himself for some time and then returned back. Let's read the same Judges chapter 11, verse 39. And it came to pass at the end of 2 months that she returned unto her father, who did with her according to his vow, which he had vowed. And she knew no man, and it was a custom in Israel. Listen to this verse very well. Let me repeat that line again. That she returned unto her father, who did with her according to his vow, which he had vowed. So the father did to her according to the vow. And what was the vow? To offer her as a burnt offering unto Jehovah Elohim, God of Israel, the Christian God, the Bible God. So the daughter of Jephthah was offered as a burnt offering to this Jehovah Elohim, the Christian God. And looking at the vow that Jephthah made, everything is clear that he knew that it was going to be a human sacrifice, that he made that vow anyway. And if he didn't know that this God accepts human sacrifices, would he have made that vow? Will you make a vow to offer something that you know your God don't accept? No. So Jephthah knew that this God accepts human sacrifices, And most deities, human sacrifices is the highest sacrifices for them. And he made that highest sacrifices for God to help him to win the battle. Simple and short. Even if he was God the creator and created the people of Ammon, would he let the Israelites to go and attack them? Why wouldn't he have settled the matter between them, but rather backing one to go and destroy the other and taking human sacrifices as a gift? Most Christians will not accept this fact that their God will accept human sacrifices. Meanwhile, human sacrifices to this God is what they are preaching every day. They preach their God accepting human sacrifices whilst denying the same thing that they are preaching. It's a wonderful thing, and I will show you why. The whole of the New Testament of the Bible, the entire concept of Christianity, the fundamental concept of Christianity is that Jesus Christ was offered as a sacrifice unto this Jehovah Elohim so that he will forgive humanity their sins. This is the fundamental concept of Christianity. Yet the same Christian would deny that their God accepts human sacrifices. Okay. While the same person denying that their God accepts human sacrifices stands in the pulpit and preaching how Jesus was used as a sacrifice for us. Was Jesus not a human? They say, no, he is God. He is not a human. So he doesn't accept human sacrifices, but he accepts God's sacrifices. God in human flesh can be used as a sacrifice to this God, but not an ordinary human, maybe. But that's just a funny way of arguing. Because the Bible stated clear that Jesus was offered as a sacrifice. He was a sacrificial lamb. And that's why they say Jesus is our Redeemer. Why is he our Redeemer? As I told you in the earlier slide, that he offered them to redeem their first sons with another animal. So redeeming means that A is to die, but you rather bring B to die for A. So B has come to redeem A. And this is the same thing the pastors are preaching every day, that Jesus Christ was to redeem us so that he would die in our place, that we will not die, so that he will die. That is the fundamental concept of Christianity. So Jesus' death is a human sacrifice unto this God. Simple and short of the matter. Unless you argue that, oh, Jesus was not human, he was God. And let's even look at it. Let's even look at that whole concept of Jesus being offered as a sacrifice for us. Let's look at even that whole concept again. Look at it this way. This is what Christianity is telling us. That God, we sin against God, and we all know in spirituality that the offender, is the one who makes the sacrifice. As it was in the Old Testament, that the sinner will bring the sheep or the goat or the bull or the pigeon to offer as a sacrifice to atone for his sins. Now, they are telling us in the New Testament that it is rather the opposite, which doesn't make any physical sense. It doesn't make any spiritual sense. The fundamental concept of Christianity doesn't make any spiritual sense. Why? Because in spirituality, it is you, the one who offended, who brings the sacrifice. The offender brings the sacrifice, not the offended. So if A offends B, it is A, the offender, the guilty person, who brings the sacrifice. So how come in Christianity it is the opposite? Even in the Old Testament, it was that way. How come in the New Testament it becomes the opposite of what was in the Old Testament? Which is also applicable across board, all spirituality, every spiritual order that you go in. Even among we humans, if I offend you, I'm the one who is to apologize. I ask whether I will compensate you or pay for damages or just mere apology, whatever it is. I, the offender, am the one who apologizes to you for offending you, for stepping on your toe. I apologize. If I have to compensate you, I'm the one who pays the compensation. I am the one who offended. How come in Christianity everything is the opposite? This doesn't make any sense, and they tell you that don't use your mind. You can't understand God with your mind. If I can't understand God with my mind, should I understand God with my belly? You, the pastor who is telling me I can't understand God with my mind, what do you use to understand the God? Are you using your belly? Or you are using your head, your buttocks, or your hand, or your leg? We human beings can only understand things with our minds, and you cannot tell me I cannot understand things with my mind. What are you using to preach the gospel? Are you using your belly? Then they again confuse you that you need the Holy Spirit to understand. I don't need Holy Spirit to understand. I only need the Holy Spirit to hypnotize me to accept foolishness. You only need the Spirit of God to hypnotize you and put a spell on you so that what is senseless will now be accepted. If you are not under the spell of this God, you will not accept senseless things. But if they put a spell on you and you are no more using your mind to think, then you accept anything they tell you. How can you accept that you offended God, and God himself turned himself into the sacrificial lamb? Instead of you bringing the sacrificial lamb, he turned himself into the sacrificial lamb, so that the sacrificial lamb that he has turned into, or he incarnated as a sacrificial lamb. So God incarnating as a lamb, so that this lamb will be sacrificed unto himself, so that he will forgive us our sin. Does it make sense to you? How can he incarnate as a lamb to be offered as a sacrifice unto himself in order for him to forgive our sins? How does this make sense to you? But this is what is being preached, and this is what we accept. According to this Christian God, everything has to do with blood. Everything. In the Old Testament, as I told you earlier, all sacrifices involve blood, sprinkling of blood, drinking of blood, blood upon blood. And he pointed out clearly that without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin, which means that if you offend this God, blood must be shed. Now you ask yourself, the creator of all, who created heaven and earth, and his bloodthirsty like this, receiving blood sacrifices, receiving human sacrifices, animal sacrifices, morning, afternoon, and evening, and launching genocidal attack against people, destroying human lives without remorse, destroying animal life without remorse, drinking blood continuously, and blood is flowing around his altar morning till night. And you call this the creator of all. How can the creator of all be demanding blood from his creatures? How can God who created all animals, God who created all humans, who created all the universe and all the planets, demanding blood from you morning and evening? Bring blood, bring blood. Your firstborn is mine. All the firstborn of your animal is mine. All your firstborn of your crops, everything is mine. First, me, blood. Meat, blood, meat, blood, meat, blood, demanding meat and blood from you morning and evening. And you call this God who created heaven and earth. You are serving a demon without knowing. But they have placed a spell upon you. You are under the hypnosis of this God. So you cannot think and understand that this is the condition that you are in. That's why when you enter into this organization, the first thing is to tell you not to think. They tell you you can't understand God. So just accept it. Don't ask questions. If you ask questions, you are a devil. Those questions are emanating from the devil. It's the devil that is causing you to ask these questions. Just accept it. He is God. He can do anything he wants. If you have all power and all you can do is demanding blood to drink, wow. Think of it again. Maybe you have to start reading the Bible as if you know nothing. That will help. When you start reading the Bible as if you know nothing, and then you try to understand what is in this book, you will be amazed. But as long as you are reading under the hypnosis of this God, as long as you are reading under the spell of this God, if you don't liberate yourself first from the spell of this God, when you read the Bible, you will not understand. You will support all the wickedness of this God. You will support all the atrocities of this God. As this God is destroying humanity, you are jubilating and praising him for destroying humanity. And that's what the Christians are doing without knowing. I don't know what it would take to save them from the hypnotic spell of this God called Jehovah Elohim. Is he God or a bloodthirsty demon? I'll come to you with part 9.